Hello guys, Crispy here, welcome back to another video. In this one, my friends, I'm going to be testing the Radeon RX 6700 XT in Alan Wake 2. This one is the Sapphire Pulse edition of the card. We are running it with the latest AMD drivers, and I'm not manually overclocking it. You can see all of its specs right here in Tech Power Up's GPU 0. Resizable bar is also enabled, and we got 12 gigabytes of GDDR6 to work with in this card. And over on the left, we're pairing it with a Ryzen 9 7950X3D with half of its cores disabled. We're only using the CCD with 3DV cache, and we're pairing that with 32 gigabytes of DDR5 6000 MHz RAM CL30. Let's get into it, shall we? Let's go for the settings first. I'm starting at 1080p resolution, native, and we're also going to test some FSR as well as higher resolutions, of course, and we're using the optimized settings by Digital Foundry. So these are basically the PS5 settings with a few changes, like texture resolution is now set to high as well as texture filtering, the shadow resolution as well, instead of like medium or low, whatever the PS5 uses, because this makes a huge difference to quality, you know, as well as the global illuminations right here, and that's about it. Of course, ray tracing is disabled, and this is a terrible idea to utilize with the 6700 XT. I'll probably still test it by the end of the video just for fun, but you should probably not utilize it. It also has some software-based ray tracing already enabled in the game. So here we have it, guys. This is 1080p with optimized settings. Let's start counting our FPS, walk around for a little bit. I also increased the brightness of the game to 100%, so it's more visible here in the video for you guys. Otherwise, it would be way too dark, like usual in Alan Wake 2 videos, you know. But yeah, if your game is a little bit darker than this, that's the reason I don't recommend you to bump up the sharpness. But since we're only here in the forest area testing out the performance, well, I thought I'd do it just so it looks a little bit more appealing, you know, here for you guys. So anyways, over here you can see that the game looks very, very good still, even though a lot of the things are still on low, but that's just the name of the preset. As I usually say in these very gorgeous looking titles and super intensive ones as well, they would probably benefit a lot from like a very low settings preset for older GPUs or just weaker GPUs in general, you know, because if you play this game with something like a 3050, for example, which is kind of a recent card, you know, it probably won't run very well unless you set everything to low. But moving on, I can see some very big shimmering over here, for example, like on faraway objects, faraway trees and vegetation with the native resolution, and that kind of goes away, or at least it's very, very much decreased with the use of FSR as well as DLSS. DLSS works a little bit better. FSR still has some shimmering, but it also increases your FPS by quite a bit, and I totally recommend utilizing it. Okay, so let's set FSR2 to quality right here, which essentially renders the game at 720p, then upscales it to 1080p, and as you can see, it is a bit less shimmery, I would say, unless you are moving, you know. If you are moving, things are actually quite shimmery. That's not the case with DLSS, but in my opinion, it actually works like an anti-aliasing, you know, and although it's a little bit softer overall, the picture, you know, especially at 1080p, at higher resolutions, it will look much better. I would probably utilize it anyways. I mean, if you're playing at 1080p, you are probably on like a 24-inch monitor, maybe 27 inches at maximum, and it will still look pretty decent, right? It's actually a playable experience and a much, much smoother one compared to FSR disabled. And also keep in mind that this forest area is probably one of the most intensive areas in the entire game, and of course, you're going to spend a little while over here, and then you're gonna go to the city, and then you're gonna come back here for the missions and stuff. Also, the reflections over there are super noisy. Not really that great looking in my opinion, but hey, it is what it is with these optimized settings. But yeah, if you're playing at 1080p resolution, I think I would stick to these settings right here. It's good for 71 frames per second on average there at the end, 53 1% lows. Again, expect a couple of drops, but in a single player title like this, it's not the end of the world. It's still gonna feel smooth and playable. And look at that, we ended it with 69 FPS right here. Perfect. But let's move on to 1440p resolution, utilizing exactly the same settings. And this is still a pretty adequate resolution for a 6700 XT. In fact, I actually tested this GPU and reviewed it in 2023, and I played all of the games in that video at 1440p, and I still had a lot of fun, and it performed very, very well. Obviously, in these very ultra super intensive titles, it struggles a little bit at 1440p resolution, unfortunately, but you know, with its pretty decent raw performance and 12 gigabytes of VRAM, it can actually handle a lot of titles at 1440p. And over here, in one of the most intensive and most gorgeous titles out there, it is good enough to achieve like 30-ish frames per second. The problem is, whenever you are closer to 30 FPS, I noticed that the game tends to skip some frames every now and again. It's not like a completely smooth and flawless experience. You can definitely tell by the frame time graph and those 1% lows that it is stuttering just a little bit sometimes. You know, I'm trying to make it stutter by just moving the camera around like this, but it's not really picking up any stuttering right now. But still, guys, if you want the 1440p experience in this card, it's gonna be rough in Alan Wake 2, okay? So you're gonna get like 30s at the minimum, and with those little frame time spikes every now and again, I would definitely just cap it to 30 frames per second to smooth those stutters out and play like that. Maybe add a little bit of motion blur as well to fake the smoothness a little bit, you know, and call it a day. But in my opinion, you should definitely utilize some FSR if you're playing at 1440p, because again, at 1080p, it already did a pretty decent job. I'm sorry about the background noise. I just can't seem to record today without this guy making a freaking ton of noise outside. But as I was saying, at 1080p, it already looked pretty good with quality FSR. So of course, at 1440p using quality FSR 2, it'll look even better. So let's try this out now. Oh, yes. Yeah, once again, it looks like it applied some anti-aliasing, you know? It doesn't look like a smudgy mess like in a few other titles. Actually, these days, games are so blurry at native resolution that applying FSR or DLSS, usually with the sharpening as well, they actually end up looking a little bit better than at native. And this is the case at 1440p. Maybe at 1080p, you could tell that it was a little bit softer. If you don't like that look, well, FSR is going to look worse for you, I guess. But here, at 1440p, it actually does look pretty sick, guys. Now, those little frame time spikes are still happening, even though we are in the 60s. They're not really noticeable. I can't really notice stuttering, even like panning the camera around like this. You know, it says that it's stuttering quite a bit, but yeah, it just looks like frame skips like I've seen with other GPUs from NVIDIA as well, the ones that I tried so far. I don't know what's going on with that, guys, but it's not really noticeable at all. If I had no frame time graph enabled, I wouldn't be able to pick up on those little stutters, or at least most of them. Anyways, we're getting like drops into the mid-40s, I would say. Yeah, 47 right there. Gets pretty intensive right here, guys. As you can see, there's still a lot of noise on the water there. There's not much we can do about that, unfortunately. It'll look a little bit better in other areas, of course, but there is a ton of noise here on this water in particular. So it is a decent experience, once again, for a single-player title that's story-driven, kind of slow-paced as well. You could definitely play the game like this, no problems whatsoever. Now, let's try it with balanced FSR, okay? Because I was really impressed when I saw the picture with balanced FSR. Look at this. I mean, there might be a little bit more shimmering when I'm moving the camera around like this, inside of bushes and stuff, but overall, it still looks very, very close to quality FSR 2, which, again, just looks like an anti-aliased native resolution. Also, we're getting averages in the 50s again. So, balanced FSR looks very similar to quality FSR, and it performs very similarly as well. I mean, we might be able to end this with 60 FPS average, but that's only like a 3 FPS improvement anyways. So it's not going to change your experience by a lot, but it still looks great. And honestly, on like a 27-inch 1440p monitor, I would have no problems using FSR 2 unbalanced at 1440p, guys. Also, I'm seeing some flickering textures sometimes. That's pretty interesting. I've seen those with the GTX 1650 as well. I thought it was because we were running out of VRAM. Of course, with the 12 gigabytes on this card, we definitely are not. And I didn't really install the Alan Wake 2 drivers because those came out at like October 23rd or 27th, something like that. And these drivers are the newest ones. They say that they fixed the same issues that the other hotfix driver for this game fixed. And these drivers released yesterday in November 3rd or November 2nd, something like that. So yeah, these are recent. They supposedly have all of the fixes for Alan Wake 2 already in place. But yet, I am still seeing... It's very rare to see those, but some black flickering textures here and there. Let's try it, though, with Performance FSR here at the 1440p resolution. And this will bump your FPS by quite a bit. But as you can see, since the picture is rendering at 720p and upscaling it, you can notice quite a lot more flickering. Yeah, and pixelation sometimes in some areas as well. Still, I'm gonna run around like this for a little bit, because if you want that 60 plus FPS experience all of the time without losing too much visual fidelity by lowering the settings below what the PS5 does, you know. There's always a bigger stutter right here in this particular area. I wonder why. Alright, it still drops a little bit, as you can see, into the mid-50s, lower 50s. No 40s anymore, so... At least there's that. It's going to be like 50 plus all of the time. That little alleyway or whatever that is also the most intensive area that I've seen so far. So, yeah, dropping to like the low 50s in the worst case scenario possible is nothing to be ashamed of. Let's set it to native once again and try it at the 4K res. Now 4K is a bit too much for the RX 6700 XT, and well, in a game as intensive as this one, I'm not expecting great things. Yep, at native resolution we are running out of VRAM because it already swapped some things that should have been on VRAM into the RAM, and that's why the RAM utilization went up from the 8 to 9 gigabytes that we were seeing before. I think this just doesn't have the raw performance required to run this game at 4K. Not many GPUs do, especially without DLSS. So let's set FSR to quality right here. It sets the game to 1440p internally and upscales it to 4K. It looks really pretty much the same as 4K native resolution and as what we were seeing before. And yeah, we're getting 30s right now, although those spikes are gonna be a little bit higher. Again, if you lock the FPS, you're gonna get rid of those little spikes here and there, or bigger spikes in this case. And it's gonna become a playable experience for sure. Now, it's pretty impressive, though, that we're getting 30-ish frames per second with this quality of graphics. Whoa, that was really noticeable, guys. VRAM usage is around 10 gigabytes at the moment. RAM utilization is going down right now, actually. So I don't think we are VRAM bound anymore. I'm actually going to restart the game just to make sure that everything is working as it should. Alright, back from the restart, still having exactly the same behavior in the frame time graph, but now the RAM is back down to where it should be, because we aren't really running out of VRAM at the moment. Now we're getting 30-ish frames per second right here, so it's still not dropping from 30 frames, okay. 31 was the minimum in this little alleyway again, so... yeah, if you lock the FPS, I think you can actually have that sweet 30 FPS locked experience all of the time. I'm actually going to do that. So I'm going to lock this to 30 and see those little spikes going away, guys. It is a much more stable experience like this. So again, whenever you saw those little frame time spikes in the frame time graph in this video, you already know now that enabling an FPS lock will smooth out everything, making things super smooth. No frame skips, no frame skips anymore whatsoever. It's just gonna be a flat frame time graph, super consistent. And again, you can always enable that motion blur to make things look a little bit more cinematic, you could say, a little bit smoother looking. I'm gonna unlock the FPS right now, okay, and now let's see how it does at balanced FSR 2 instead of quality. Yeah, we get a few more FPS. I don't think we saw like 40s previously, although I locked the FPS to get rid of the little stuttering that was happening. It was a little bit too much at 4K native resolution or 4K quality FSR resolution. But as the FPS go up, those will be less and less noticeable. And right now we're getting like 40s. Okay, on average, that's pretty decent. Let's see it in this direction right here. Yeah, dropping into the mid-30s, 35. That is pretty good. I guess you could actually play it at like 35 FPS locked and not dip into the lower 30s whatsoever throughout your gameplay session. And visual quality-wise, compared to quality FSR here on Balanced, it's just a little bit more shimmery once again, but it still looks pretty good and very, very respectable in my opinion. Yeah, you can see a little bit more flickering as well sometimes at the distance when things are loading in from the LOD. But yeah, overall, no problems whatsoever. I mean, I didn't have a problem at 1440p with balanced FSR, so I won't have a problem at 4K with it either. Now, performance FSR should look very good still at 4K, and indeed it does, my friends. And look at those FPS now, guys. Wow, we're at 50 frames per second. Of course, this is internal resolution of 1080p, so it's pretty low. But once again, in this title, for some reason, FSR and DLSS look very, very good, even on the performance setting. All right, so we got 49 FPS there at the end with performance FSR 2. Ultra performance is a bit too much, you know, it's a bit too low. I can instantly feel the smoothness difference though, because now we're getting 60s, which is quite nice and smooth. But of course, it is very, very shimmery, especially when you're moving. If you just stop like this, it looks pretty good. You know, like FSR does a really nice job of reconstructing the image here at 4K resolution, even with ultra performance FSR. But as soon as you start moving, things are really pixelated and shimmery, so yeah, not worth utilizing ultra performance or bothering with. But alright, lastly, let's take a look at that ray tracing performance. We're at 1080p again with quality FSR, which looked very good. Once again, it's how I'd play this game at the 1080p resolution. But now let's enable the low preset under ray tracing right here. So this enables direct lighting, which means that the denoising quality set to low right here on the lighting. Path trace is still off, and the transparency is set to low. This is extremely intensive. Yeah, you can clearly see it right away. It's getting 30 frames per second. Previously, it was like 60s, 70s at these quality settings presets or resolution presets, 1080p with FSR quality, you know. But yeah, enabling ray tracing just wrecks everything. You should not do this on the 6700 XT, and now I'm seeing the frame skips a lot better. Like, look at that. This is what I saw with the NVIDIA cards, and it's also not showing any stuttering or any little spikes on the frame time graph, aside from those bigger ones from time to time. But yeah, it just skips too many frames. It might actually be a little bit noisier as well in terms of the image, and of course, it's dropping into cinematic frame rates, lower 20s. This is definitely not doable. And in terms of the noise here on the water, I guess it's a little bit better looking, but there's still a lot of noise, especially when you move like this. Yeah, not good whatsoever. Just gonna try it on like performance FSR, which is 540p. All right, and all right, now we're getting 30s, but I guess in worst case scenarios, it's still gonna drop from 30. And of course, 1080p with performance FSR starts looking pretty rough in terms of pixelation, so not worth utilizing this once again. Keep ray tracing off with the RX 6700 XT, but definitely utilize the optimized settings because those look very, very good. And utilize FSR 2 as well because it cleans up the image sometimes. And overall, it's just a great experience. Also, I just noticed now that the GPU utilization is actually dropping here to 80-something%. So it's probably just not optimized to run the ray tracing in this title. We can't be CPU bound whatsoever, of course. Game isn't really CPU intensive either. So, yep, that's been it. I mean, it's not really dropping right now, but it requires 540p resolution, so No. Catch you in the next one very soon. As always, guys, love you all. Bye-bye.